Excuse me. Do you have anything sweet to add to this? Other than yourself, of course.
Like sugar?
Yeah, I'll take whatever you have, ma'am. Thank you.
Is there something wrong?
I just remembered something back in Boston that
Hey everyone, I'm Gabbie Heinzelman.
And I'm Travis Spangenberg. Welcome to Know Your Onions. In January of 1919, the streets of Boston were transformed into a disaster zone when a tank holding millions of gallons of molasses suddenly exploded. A tidal wave of brown syrup blasted through the city, destroying homes, toppling infrastructure, and killing citizens. Not only was the catastrophe very bizarre, but it's also related to Prohibition in a way. How could we resist?
That Wednesday on Boston's North End started like any other. Busy and cold. Just after noon, every ounce of normalcy vanished. The ground began to shake. A deep rumbling pervaded the air as if a massive train was passing overhead. Then, it appeared. A 25-foot wave of molasses destroying everything in its path. It sped through the streets at 35 miles per hour, proving that slow as molasses is still pretty darn fast. The carnage was even worse at the storage tank. Not only did pedestrians and buildings have the flood itself to fear, but they also ran the risk of being crushed by the panels of metal flying through the air or pierced by the rivets shooting out of the tank like machine gun fire. The force of the explosion had enough power to bend the steel train rails and topple streetcars.
Now, a molasses flood may sound humorous in the abstract, but in reality, it's no joke. The incident resulted in over $100 million in material damages in today's money. 21 people were killed by drowning and by crushing, and over 150 more people were injured. The stickiness and darkness of the liquid made it nearly impossible to locate additional victims as the cleanup progressed. It was an undertaking that included 87,000 man-hours of debris clearing, basement pumping, chiseling, and hosing down the entire neighborhood with salty harbor water.
Perhaps the most tragic of all was that the accident occurred after years of neglect and warning signals. The Purity Distilling Company tank was built in a rush 3 years earlier in the thick of World War I. While we know molasses as a sweetener, the ethanol that can be produced from it was highly profitable in the production of explosives. This rush job resulted in a tank with very thin steel walls and far too few rivets holding it together. Plus, the man in charge of the construction wasn't even an engineer, and he couldn't even read the plans.
Before the tank was filled, it should have been filled with water to test it for leaks. As far as we know, that never happened. When it was filled with molasses, the leaks on the side of the light-colored tank were so apparent that the company painted it brown to hide them. It wasn't long before it became a popular spot in the neighborhood for people to collect leaking molasses for their kitchens, and the children around would hold sticks up to the tank to make lollipops. But the hazards don't stop there. The tank was also overfilled. The sheer volume of the molasses inside, coupled with the shoddy construction of the tank, made this eventual tragedy an extremely predictable and preventable one.
And why would they overfill the tank anyway? The war was over. The demand for explosives was way down. Well, the flood occurred on January 15, 1919, just one day before Americans learned that Prohibition was definitely going to happen. Alcohol, like the kind made from molasses, was about to be in very high demand. They only had 366 distilling days left until it all became illegal.
The next flood surrounding the company was the flood of lawsuits. The investigation and hearings lasted years. The mountains of evidence against Purity and its parent company, United States Industrial Alcohol, were substantial. That didn't stop USIA lawyers from floating their theory. The tank had been sabotaged by anarchists. No evidence was offered to support their claim, and USIA was ultimately held responsible.
The attorney in charge of the hearings, Hugh Ogden, recommended that the USIA pay out $300,000 in damages. That's about $4.5 million today. The tragedy led to major changes in the way Boston handles construction projects, requiring an actual engineer to sign off on the plans and then submit it to the city. Bostonians claimed that the area reeked of molasses for years, some swearing that the smell of the sticky substance still subsists today.
I'll get rid of this. Oh.